So what are some of the thoughts?
One of the things we connected was that you know you've performed when you've achieved your goal. So the markers change between person or business vision.
Yeah, so they've got clear goals, yeah. And that changes, yeah. What else?
At my last company, it was about wowing the customer. That's the main performance.
Yeah. And how did they measure wowing the customer? What did they do?
I think probably winning work is the main measure of performance there. So work won.
Yeah.
Was,
So there's wowing the customer at the top level, but underneath it is winning work.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's a quantity. Yeah.
I think in many businesses it comes down to sort of bottom line meeting or exceeding the expectations financially.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Completely agree.
I would say performance is when you've actually taken enough risks and made enough mistakes to have actually learned something valuable.
Interesting, yeah, they do. Most organisations talk about innovation, and some of the first people they kick the hell out of are the intrapreneurs, innovators. So that's really interesting. So logically, yes. Emotionally and behaviourally, rarely.
It's about achieving the targets, really.
Yeah,
Good old targets. With no risks, usually.
Completely, yeah. So
As a salesperson, 20 years, I can tell you, no risks involved.
yeah, you got
And even if the market doesn't allow it, you still have to deliver 20%. That's what your management tells you.
above, over
Of
above,
course, you
absolutely.
get kicked by the market and inside, that's what you do.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Isn't it? So what do you start to see as a pattern emerging here? What can't we get away from?
Money.
Absolutely. So, you know, go on.
Actually, it was not from me, it was from the lady here. Actually, there was maybe something that is not linked to money, which is performance. Why are we just talking about work and not like personal life?
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting one. So I'm going to put here, what do you role model? I'll explain what I mean by that in a second.
One of the things that's important to me is how you do something.
Yeah. Yeah, you just said it. Yeah.
And your intention.
Yeah, people don't often judge you on your intention. You might have the best intention in the world, but they'll judge you on your behaviour, won't they?
So, to strike a slightly cynical note, I would say performance means avoiding overperformance.
What does that mean?
Well,
Talk to me about it.
one of the things that I've come to have to conclusion. When I first started out, I'm a lawyer. When I first started out, I would go to interviews and I think, how do I show these people that I'm good enough to do this job? And now I go and speak to people and I think, okay, how do I show them I'm good enough to do the job, but I'm not a threat?
Yeah, that's interesting. So are you going in as an advisor? Or?
Yeah, I go as a consultant.
Okay.
Yes.
That's slightly different, isn't it?
Yes,
From
yeah,
internal.
yeah, but nonetheless, it's one of the things that I've come across. It's not the way you think it's going to be. You know, if I show I'm fantastic at this, you know, I'm going to hand it.
Well, it's great if you're fantastic at something, but your job, if you're an advisor or a consultant, is to make them look fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. My job in Deloitte was to actually get kicked out and told that we're useless, and the client to look really good. Genuinely, I mean, that's what it's about. Sometimes, without damaging the relationship. So on the long term, so we know that we're playing this game. Not always the case, but just sometimes. Sometimes they bring you in to do the difficult stuff that they don't want to do themselves. They don't want to be tarnished with it. What's interesting was just you can't get away from the numbers. You can't get away from finance. Sometimes in coaching, I sometimes think that and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, but that's why I've set up a not-for-profit, a charity, as well as a limited company. Is we can't get away from the financials. So your clients are going to be focused on financials, so get under the skin of that and understand that. And the other thing is understand the context in which they work. So the guy who's, your company, is all about wowing the customers. So some of the people I work with, what they do is they actually send out feedback to customers and then they get the feedback from them, and you get a performance-related payment based on that. So then the art is which customers do you send it to? But that's a slightly cynical view, isn't it? But the key thing is that in organisational life, for anyone that you're helping who wants to grow and become successful in an organisation, yes, it's about wowing the customers, but it's about hitting the financial targets. The other thing is around risk, and we'll get onto this in a minute under N. It's also about sponsorship. So, one of the questions you want to ask your clients, if you're ever working with clients, is who's sponsoring them? Because I've not met anyone who's got to the top who hasn't had sponsorship, who hasn't had someone pulling them through. Make sense? In power-based organisations, pyramids, not my favourite type, I prefer those. But in power-based environments, they who know the CEO, the board, the chairman win. It's about getting that sort of sponsorship and support. So how can you support your client to do that? I won't say which organisation, but it's an organisation that was in the media a lot in December, and my client was actually on the hook for what they were in the paper for. We could foresee that this was going to happen about 6 months, 9 months before, because we could see that there were certain people that didn't like this person. So what we did was, they were very fortunately, a new CEO was coming into the organisation. We made sure my client was very close to that CEO. So when shit hit the fan, and it was all over the Daily Mail, the CEO had this person's back. If we'd not done that, if we'd not put that time and energy and effort into that relationship, he probably wouldn't have his job right now. Does that make sense? So think about your clients is how can I support them with sponsorship? I think you're absolutely right around how you do it. I think increasingly with social media, with Russell Brand running around and shouting about all sorts of different people, with the political environment we're in right now as we're trying to decide which hung parliament we should go for, or not bother. How you do it is going to become increasingly important. But I'm slightly cynical about this, if I'm honest, because, and I hope it will change, but this is Darren Robson for you, no one else's. So we've got a load of organisations that don't pay tax into the British system. They do through their employees, but they don't pay corporate tax. And we all know it, and yet we still buy their products, because we're lazy as consumers. So it's really interesting, because we've got an espoused value that we give a damn about organisations that do the right thing, but then our behaviour goes, I'm just going to go and get my lovely chai tea latte from that lovely organisation that runs a coffee shop. Do you know what I mean? So it's really interesting. I can't square the circle on this. My clients tell me increasingly that it's important. So their brand is important, their espoused values are important, they want to walk their talk. I'm not sure, does consumer behaviour, do we get tricked by good marketing? I don't know the answer, and I'm not, it's an open discussion and debate, what do people think and feel. So I think that we'll catch up eventually, we've not caught up completely yet, between espoused values and behaviours. Does that make sense? Because when we can walk 200 yards to get a coffee here, because they're really sustainable and ethical, but then there's the coffee shop here that isn't paying their tax. We still kind of do that habitual thing, don't we, as human beings? So I think that's interesting. So I get the role modelling. I think it's so important because you get outed in social media. So I went to, I'll tell you this story because I think it's quite funny. So I went to a Pizza Express with my 2 daughters and my wife about 3 months ago. And we had a pizza, as you do, Pizza Express. Kids loved it, we all loved it. So, and I paid for it on my card. And I put the tip on the card, as you do. And the guy, and I said to the guy who was serving, I said, thanks ever so much, brilliant service, do you get the tip? And he said, no, I only get 38% of it. So that was like a red rag to a bull to me. So I was like, really? You don't get, the full contribution? He said, no, I don't. No, we only get 38%. So I was quite livid, low impulse control. Wife going, shush Darren, shush Darren. Annalise and Anna's going, Daddy. Daddy, I'll put you on the naughty step. And the guy just said to me, look, please don't say anything. So I said, all right. So me being who I promised I wouldn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. However, this is an interesting hack for you. And it worked with Canon as well, because I had a problem with Canon recently, and I did the same thing and it worked really well. So I came home, I went on to Pizza Express's Facebook, and I posted on Facebook what had just happened. I didn't say where I'd been, but just said, I just want you to clarify your view on this, your policy. And then, because I didn't get an instant reaction, low impulse control, an instant reaction, really important. The point I'm making is really important. I went on to Twitter. You don't want me as a customer, do you? And so I went onto their Twitter account and I tweeted about it. Got instant reaction. But it wasn't the reaction. And this is one of those stories where you wish you'd taken a photo of something. Anyway, so I got into this interaction with this person on Twitter, and then on Facebook as well. They came over with their policy, and then they'd linked up that I was the same person. And it went on and it went on and it went on, and it was getting quite interesting. And then the silly idiot, he wasn't that silly, because I think it was a he. There you go, it wasn't a lady, she never did that. The person obviously looked at my Twitter account, and they worked out that I ran several small businesses. So then they came back over, this is really brilliant, you're going to love this, and they went, "We're not run by Del Boy." "We're not run by Del Boy." That's what they tweeted back at me. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get my camera. By the time I'd gone and got my camera to take a photo of it, they deleted it and got rid of it all. But you know when you're like, oh, I've got the notification was there. So that's just an example of how reputation, but they quickly realised they made a mistake and delete. So I couldn't get it, but I thought that was quite funny. There's a slightly anecdotal, off-piste. What's the interesting thing? Canon, Apple uploaded new software and Canon hadn't caught up. So I'd emailed them and I hadn't heard after 48 hours. And I love Canon, great organisation, great cameras. And they hadn't responded, so I went onto Facebook, and within 15 minutes I had a response. So there's another small hack for you. Organisations are paranoid about social media. They are reacting to social media so fast because of the fact that you get the swarm factor. Yeah. If they had not deleted that Del Boy comment and it had been on there for 10 or 15 minutes, it would have got retweeted and it would have got seen. Yeah. So social media is something worth looking at and understanding. But back to this, so performance. The next thing they told me, and there was 60 hours of data that I went through. The next thing they said was important was image or brand. And I'm going to put something else here for you that are coaches or consultants or small business owners. They started to become really conscious of the fact that they had an image. And that was an image that was not just only in the organisation, but also in the industry, so outside of the organisation as well. And they became very conscious of that image. And some of you might do the whole dressing and everything else. I'm useless at that stuff. But think about Richard Branson and people like that. A very clear image about I don't wear ties, I don't wear suits. CEOs became very clear on the fact that they need to think about what they project. Yeah, what's my brand equity? So one of the things that I do for my clients, and it's really good because it earns you money. It's a smart way to work. So when you've got a coaching opportunity with somebody, do Live 360. Some of you probably already know this stuff. You do quantitative 360 with tools, so 360 tools. Do you know what a qualitative 360 is? So quantitative 360 or Live 360 is where you pick up the phone to 10 people and you ask them 4 questions. That's all you need to ask is 4 questions in my experience. Appreciative inquiry, so some of you will know that. What does that person do well? So what's their strength? What do they consistently show that they do well? What could they do better? Yeah? And then what should they stop doing? But the killer question, my favourite question is this, and it's been worded like this after 4 years of doing hundreds of these, is I ask people this question and I say, when X is not in the room, what do other people say about them? So not what do you say, so when X is not in the room, what do other people say about them? And it's really interesting because it just cuts through the kind of conscious mind into the kind of subconscious, and people blurt. They don't, it's not always negative, by the way. Sometimes you think, oh, it's going to be negative. It's not. It's very balanced. and they say very positive and sometimes deeply negative things about certain characters. But I just think that's a really interesting thing to think about building into any of you that are working in that way, to work with senior executives, building Live 360, because you can get paid well to do it. What it also gives you is really good data on who is this person. So some brave souls even interview people's mums. I've interviewed someone's wife, done that a couple of times, but I've never done mums. So I think there's a guy called Marshall Goldsmith. Marshall Goldsmith, he says he does that. But the interesting thing is that they become very conscious of the fact that they've got a brand. So in your role as a trusted advisor, supporter of that person, get them to think about their brand. And one of the things that I've become conscious of, that I see people doing quite well, and sometimes I see people who I think are really useless doing this really well, which would be amazing, is expert positioning. So any of you that are running your own business, you want to start thinking about what's your real, that niche. I think people that are being really successful in coaching often are quite clear on a niche, an area that they're really good at. And what I'd say is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I often meet people, so I was talking to somebody who's a Deloitte lawyer, funny enough, so there we go, a lawyer in Deloitte and works with our team in Spain. And I was speaking to her a couple of months ago, and we're going out to see her next month and the team. Which is really looking forward to it. And she was saying to me, oh, well, I'm going to leave behind my 15, 20 years of legal, and I'm going to go and do something completely different. And I was like, well, that's great, but let's think about, you've got this 20 years of experience and network, and you know all these wonderful people, and you've got some real track record. So what I would say to you is think about that, because guess who some of my biggest clients are now? Consultants, yes.
Someone you already knew before?
Potentially, but go right back to what did I say at the very beginning of where engineering. Funny, hey? So there I was, not an engineer working in an engineering environment. Now I work in engineering type organisations quite often. Because I understand the mindset, I understand what they need, and I also understand where the sort of empathy, the emotional intelligence, some of those areas could do with being developed. Because I've been on that journey, I've been at the very grassroots. So for any of you that are thinking about setting up a business, or you're thinking about what your niche is, think about the things that you've done in the past that you were very successful at, and use those to get kind of leverage. Next one was network. So they became very clear on that they had to build a network, and that network was on 3 levels. So internal, so they became very strong at building their internal network. So this afternoon I've just come from a very large bank where they have just fired 4 people that I've been working with. Just shows you how crap I am, doesn't it? No, they've just got rid of a team, so they're retrenching to the US, and they're letting go of a certain, it's not just 4 people, it's 80 people in the team that they've let go. So they've got rid of the whole team. And what's really interesting is I'm having that conversation with 3 of the clients today, is that they're all realising after 13 and 18 years respectively, in between, so 13, 15, 18, something like that, they're all realising that they've got a really big internal network, and that's all. So in organisations like American Express, I experienced it in Deloitte. So when I eventually left Deloitte in 2008, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know a single person. So that's why I didn't go and set my business up in 2008. I gave myself a couple more years to work in Penna. So that's really important to think about when you're working with clients, if they're going through a big transition. And if they can foresee that this transition is going to happen, so they're going to retire, they're a CEO that wants to move into a different role, or a non-executive, move into a non-executive direction, or I'm seeing a big trend in a lot of my sort of 55 age range to 60 MDs, CEOs, senior FDs. I'm seeing a big trend in actually going, what I want to create is a portfolio life. Yeah, so they want to earn a bit of money, doing some consultancy. They want to be a non-executive director, or they want to be a trustee of something they care about. So they're trying to build this sort of portfolio. Have any of you read Charles Handy's work? So I think Charles Handy said it best. He's got a really nice model. And if you can afford to do this, I actually I am doing this is how I live my life, almost, pretty much, is a third of your life is on earning a living, a third of your life is on doing what you love, and then a third of your life is on contribution and giving back. And I think that's a really good thing. I can't remember the guy who was the original Maverick said something on TED that's just come out. He said, if you need to give back, you took too much. So I think that's quite nice. So, you know, I do use the phrase giving back. I think actually it's better to say make a difference or to contribute. Make a contribution. So, back to what we were talking about in terms of sponsorship. They learn to harvest and build a network internally. Yeah, so they get the sponsorship, they get the people to kind of draw them up, they get the people to kind of help them with risks. So a really good book is by Gothy, can't remember his first name, there's a couple who wrote it, what's it called? Oh gosh, what's the one? Clever. Do you know the article Clever? There's a PhD, no, he's a PhD. They're sociologists, I think, Robert Gothy. They wrote a book called Clever, and there's an HBR article called Clever. And what they say is that your job in the top job is to be the umbrella, the organisational umbrella, to protect people from the organisational crap. Yeah. So it's like your job at that most senior level is to protect people from that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, for any of you that run your own business, you'll know you've got to build your external network. So they realise that they need to build industry profile, and they need to be seen. If they wanted to get to the top job, they had to be seen as attractive by other organisations. Why? My brother's just doing this. So my brother's just shy of getting to a directorship in an organisation. They've been promising it for 2 or 3 years. Please don't ever share this with anyone. So basically what we've done is we've played him off against another company. So another company have said, you know, we want you to join us. Absolute conscious decision. He really quite likes that idea of that organisation. He can see the pathway. So he's taken it back to his CEO and said, so these guys have offered me this, and this is the pathway they've offered me. What do you think the results be?
They've come back with something better.
Exactly. They've just come back with something better. So you know, it's quite interesting, isn't it? You know, I wrote about the war for talent just before I was leaving Deloitte. I was part of the talent team. And I think we said the war for talent is over, talent's won. So I think he went through a bit of a sticky time over the last 3 or 4 years, but I'm seeing it again, that there's a real war for top talent in organisations. So if you're a coach, you can kind of help people. So what you need to be thinking about is how can I build my external network to help them? Say for instance, I'm friends with the guys who run Critical Eye. Critical Eye have got 250 odd CEOs, 250 odd non-executive directors. You know, I can plug my clients into Critical Eye and really help them, you know, establish their, you know, their mentoring groups, you know, their kind of tribe around other CEOs. So have a think about that. How can you help your clients kind of get connected into other people like that? What do you think the final kind of area of network was that everyone talked about?
Personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Personal. So support network. You know, not surprising for many of you maybe, every single person, one of the CEOs said to me, I wouldn't be here without my husband or wife. I couldn't do what I do without their support. So it's really important you think about that and help them to think about that. How do they look after home life? Often I find with CEOs, they're good at that. What I find with people that are on the way up, they're often not so good at that. Yeah, they're not so good at looking after them. And the last one is all about, I asked them, you know, what keeps you awake at night? What do you think the answer was? Not much. It's really surprising. Nothing, really. They said, I know what you're saying, but actually I'm very good at putting work down. I've got outside interests that are, you know, just as equally as important to me. So why is that important in our roles is because sometimes people get very, very focused in on work. You know, they go beyond pressure zone, they go beyond stretch zone, they go into that stress zone, and they become fixated with work. And that's not a good place to be because that's where burnout is. I've had one client in 4 years had a double heart bypass. You know, that's one too many in my eyes. You know, because he just wouldn't. You know, very alpha male type character, loved the organisation, loved the business, but would not stop. Would do stupid hours, would not stop. And in the end, his body was like 54, double heart bypass. So support network. Next one. It's about exposure. I don't mean in a lurid way. Notice how I'm sloping down. No. About the way I'm writing. Really interestingly, every 18 months to 4 years, they got pushed into a role that was a stretch role. So if someone you're working with has not been moved on for 3 or 4 years, it's worth kind of challenging and saying, is this the right place for you? And I'll give you another model that I used. It's called the 10 C's, but I'll give you the 4 C's, because it might be useful. So if you come across somebody that culturally doesn't fit within the organisation, guess what? The organisation's not going to change. You know, I went back into Deloitte the second time with a real agenda of, we're going to bring coaching into Deloitte. I'm going to help Deloitte learn all about what I've learned. Deloitte, at that time, didn't give a monkeys about it. And now Deloitte's doing some really great stuff, which is great. But at that time, my timing was way off. Any of you that are entrepreneurs, you'll learn all about, it's all about timing. So that's why my 50 websites that I've got in development, I'm waiting for the right moment. You know, so cultural. So if you're working with somebody and they're not enjoying what they do, it's really difficult. Ask them, do they culturally fit? Ask their boss, do they culturally fit? If their boss says they don't culturally fit, get them the hell out of there or moved from that boss. Because I've tried on too many occasions to help people that don't culturally fit to become successful, and I've tried it myself, and it doesn't work. And it's painful for the individual, it's painful for the organisation. The next one is character. So the fact that I like cheesy jokes and I'm really not that funny, as my family always tell me, that means I'm unemployable. Yeah? But it's my character, you know, I am who I am. So I'll come back to the question in a second. So character is the next one. So human beings, you know, I love coaching, I'm a big believer in change. I'm not a big believer in transformational change. I'm a big believer in small, bite-sized chunks that kind of improve over time. I would love to believe that we can fully transform ourselves in a few months, but I think it's a load of rubbish, even though I used to help sell it in Deloitte. I think it's about small, incremental improvements. And I was with a coach who's part of the Sky racing team, and I asked him the question the other week when we were travelling up north together. And I said, you know, what's the difference that makes a difference in Sky? And he just said, 1%, one thing. We just do small, tiny, incremental improvements, and we keep focusing on those, keep measuring on those, and they improve over time. So character. If someone's character is being challenged, it's very difficult for someone to fundamentally shift who they are. So if the Venn diagram isn't enough overlap, help them get the hell out of there. Because in my experience, it's much better for people to be around people that get them. It's much better for people to be around people who appreciate them for who they are. You know, it's awful if you're in an environment where your strengths, your talents, your gifts, your contribution, what you love to do is not being seen, it's not being acknowledged, it's not being loved, it's not being appreciated. And I see too many people working in those types of environments. Some of the kids that we work with within Mo Foundation are like that. So Natalia, when I met Natalia 3 years ago, she does drawings. So I met her for a coffee 3.5 years ago, and we met for a coffee, and half an hour, 45 minutes into the conversation, I said, give up your job. She was like, sorry? I was like, just give up your job. And the reason I'd said it, I now realise as I post-rationalise, was because I was Natalia. Yeah, there was this young, talented kid who was working stupid hours. She's Polish. She's about 23, 24 at this time, and she was just being unappreciated. And she had this, you know, had these talents and gifts. So I just said, look, for 6 months I'm going to pay you to set up your own business. Natalia's now got her own thriving, successful business. She's got 20, 30 other artists working for her, and she's just set up a thing called Doodler, which has got, it's about I Think I Can't Draw, and they're in 8 cities across the world, so look up Doodler. You know, so, you know, Natalia's done it as well, and it's because I could hear this person's talent, I could hear that their character wasn't being seen. And some of the kids that we deal with and young people we deal with in Mo Foundation, that's their experience all the time. So as coaches, people who've got these skills, you can really help them. So yes, it's about working with CEOs, but it's also about helping the person that, you know, is right next door to you. So I've helped my brothers and sisters and family members with this stuff. So exposure, 18 months to 4 years. If they're not moving on after 4 years, it's probably they're not on the talent and succession pipeline. or they're in the completely wrong function or in the complete wrong. And they're probably not going to get to the top job. And then the last one, sustainability. I called it sustainability because I couldn't think of anything else. But sleep would be just as good. Is that they sleep well at night. So I don't know what you're like, but as I said earlier, you meet some people that are on their way up and they burn the midnight oil. They're just not sleeping enough. They're not looking after themselves. They're damaging their bodies. They're hurting themselves. And what I find really interesting about really top performers is they're really good at getting that sleep. They're really good at stepping back and giving themselves the time off. So for the last 3 years, I've taken the whole of August off. So I take the whole of August off. Last August I answered 8 emails. That was all. And I take pretty much the whole of December off. And I work in sort of 2-month periods. So I sprint for 2 months and then I take time off. So I've just had a month off over Easter. So this is why I'm just coming back into the workplace against now. So I'm kind of listening and learning from observing these guys. And I find that it takes me a while to get back into it. So forgive me, this is day 2 of coming back into the world. So not quite fully up to speed. But I find that rhythm really works well for me. And so I'm in a fortunate position I'm able to do that, but it's by design. Does that make sense? So what I want you to do is I want you to just give yourself some time individually, and then I'm going to get you to move around a bit and meet someone else, because I think hopefully this is about networking. And I want you to share with someone else what's some of your personal insights. So where are the reds? So red, amber, green. So red, I'm not very good at this. I haven't got a clear why, or I'm not very clear on my purpose, or I'm very clear on it. So red, amber, green this. Yeah. So if it's all green, great. Well done, you. Teach us a few things, because I'm not all green. And if it's a fused reds, and then what I want you to do is just explore that with someone else. Does that make sense? So give yourself 5 minutes. Go. And then I'll answer any questions.